and welcome to another edition of Diplomatic Channel. I am Amarachi Ubani. This week, we'll continue our conversation with career diplomat Ambassador Olusegun Akinsoya on the impact of the coronavirus on international relations and Africa's security. Plus, a look into the EU's plan to impose visa restrictions on Nigerians. But first, a quick check on other discussions in diplomatic circles. U.S. President Donald Trump says he's looking for a new ambassador to Germany after picking current diplomat Richard Grenell to serve as acting U.S. intelligence chief. Senior administration officials had said last week that Grenell would remain as ambassador even as he took up the post of acting director of national intelligence, a position that oversees the 17-agency U.S. intelligence community. President Trump also said he would consider signing a deal with the Taliban to bring a close to the conflict in Afghanistan.
I'll be appointing an ambassador to Germany. I will say Ambassador Grenell has done a fantastic job. This is just a temporary job. We have 5 people that we're looking at very seriously, expert people, and at a certain point in the not too distant future, we'll be announcing who they are.
Pope Francis has warned against what he calls inequitable solutions to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, saying they would only be a prelude to new crisis. Many believe he was referencing U.S. President Donald Trump's Middle East peace proposal. Pope Francis made the comment in the southern Italian port city of Bari, where he traveled to conclude a meeting of bishops from all countries in the Mediterranean basin. He said the Mediterranean region is currently threatened by outbreaks of instability and conflict, both in the Middle East and different countries of North Africa, as well as between various ethnic, religious, or confessional groups. Finally, U.S. President Donald Trump is in India for his first official visit to the country. He received a massive public reception after he landed in Gujarat state. President Trump was welcomed at the airport by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who enveloped him in a bear hug soon after he landed. He also addressed a massive public rally with Prime Minister Modi at the Motera Stadium, the world's largest cricket venue. More than 100,000 people present at the venue burst into applause for the two leaders. President Trump's visit is expected to focus on deepening the ties between the two world's largest democracies. Welcome back. While China says the number of new cases from COVID-19 are stable or dropping, worry turns to South Korea, where the number of new cases in the country more than doubled in one day on Saturday. The news made its way to headlines as the country confirmed that 229 new cases had been confirmed since Friday, raising the total to 433. Authorities say many of the new cases are linked to a hospital and to a religious group near the southeastern city of Daegu. Prime Minister Chung Si-kyun has described the situation as grave. Now, speaking of grave, head of the Chinese mission to the UN at Geneva, Mr. Shen Zhu, says the novel coronavirus is a grave test for all countries.
This is a grave test, not only for China, but for everyone in the world, for every country, for the whole international community. I should say we will stand the test, and we are confident because of the strong leadership, because the capability of China to mobilize, as you see, the whole nation to work together to fight against the spread of the virus.
Last week, I started a conversation with career diplomat Ambassador Olusegun Akinsoya on the impacts the virus is having or could have on international relations and diplomacy. Him being a former Nigerian ambassador to the African Union, I did ask whether there could be more cooperation by the African Union towards this global problem. Take a listen to his response.
I think because of the role that China is now playing in Africa, and the fact that there have been a lot of people, in fact, they have settlements almost in all the places. You have Chinese markets, you have Chinese food, you have Chinese everything. So it's important that EU should respond. There must be a continental response. Just like we had in the case of Ebola, to contain the spread of this epidemic.
This week, the conversation continues on Africa's security challenges in light of a pending global crisis. I mean, Africa is already faced with, a potpourri of, security issues. There's a Libya crisis that's been going on since the death of Muammar Gaddafi. And then there is also, the political crisis in South Sudan, as President Salva Kiir and Riek Machar try to figure out a political solution, to governance and so on. How does Africa face all of these issues without them interlapping? Because now they're also faced with the global health crisis.
Africa has been placed with a lot of conflicts. There was a progressive movement from interstate conflicts to intrastate. But if you look at the intrastate conflicts in the last 20 years or 30 years in Africa, ethnic, religious, genocide, internecine conflicts, election-related conflicts, election that is supposed to be a democratic change has now become a peace and security issue. And this has been exacerbated by conflicts, extremism, banditry, kidnapping, the Boko Haram, in the Sahel. No region is free in Africa. The DRC, the Somalia, and Libya and Sudan, all conflicts. And it was in the realization of that in the year 2013, when Agenda 2063 was put in place, a component of the Agenda 2063, the overarching theme of the Agenda 2063 is having a prosperous, peaceful, united, and integrated Africa, where...
I think that was in South Africa, right?
Yeah. But development trajectory in the last couple of years has been on the increase. It has been successful development orientation, the African Free Trade Area, the NEPAD development, but all these were truncated by the constraints of conflicts. You cannot have development without peace, and you cannot have peace without development. That is the reason why African countries as part, their aspirations within the Agenda 2063, and the fourth aspiration is having a peaceful Africa by the year 2020.
And we are in 2020.
And we're in 2020. And that was why the 33rd session of the African Union, the one that has just taken place, was devoted to the theme, silencing the guns and creating the right atmosphere for development. You cannot have all these issues about development when the guns sounds are all over. There's genocide, there is banditry, there is killing and harassment. The meeting was then devoted to what do we now do to move forward? Do we need a change of mindset? We need to really strategize to energize our responses on peace and security? Well, they were able to talk around it, and they zeroed in on Libya and Sudan. Sudan, because of the implications. If you don't have a government of national unity, and both Salva Kiir and Riek Machar are still on their throats, and this is an emerging country that has a lot of prospects, a lot of potentials. And if that is not resolved, it filters in through Sudan, to Chad, to Nigeria, and all the repercussions in terms of people who will be coming to Nigeria and will be causing a lot of pain for us. The same thing for Libya. Since the death of Muammar Gaddafi, a lot of cells have grown in Libya. And it has now accentuated into a division with a lot of foreign intervention. Also, there's the element of foreign intervention. Some few years back, we developed the African Peace Fund, of which Nigeria is one of the largest contributors. How do you break the over-reliance, over-dependence on the foreign donors? It's important now that you now try to apply African solutions, Pan-African solutions to African problems. It's no longer a jargon. Even the AU, the formation of the African Union was predicated on the African solutions to African problems. That has to be expanded. It has to be stressed. It has to be amplified. We're sure now that in terms of efforts, in terms of ideas, in terms of finances, yeah, we still need some support, but we need more African presence. Even the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, did mention that there needs to be more African presence in the solution of the Libyan crisis. I believe that, the United Nations Security Council has the primary responsibility for international peace and security. The efforts of the EU and other peace and security councils were subsidiary. They are subsidiary roles. But most of the issues that are discussed in the United Nations now, issue of migration, issue of peace, humanitarian responses, the forced displacement leading to IPRs. These are all African-related issues, and Africa will continue to be on the major agenda of the United Nations.
Just one last question, and that's still on security.
Okay.
The multinational joint task force, which probably is non-existent right now, because we haven't, felt their presence or their existence in this part of Africa. It seems Nigeria, each country is facing its own security
challenges. Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
Well, I don't know whether you had an exclusive interview that was granted the Chief of Army Staff yesterday. I followed it through on TVC, and he spoke about the challenges of the multinational force. I was in the African Union when the idea was conceptualized, and we looked at the concept of.
And now to my last question, the multinational joint task force, which was set up by countries here in West Africa to fight terrorism, fight Boko Haram insurgency, and so on. More recently, we've seen individual attacks, in different, we've seen isolated attacks in individual countries, and it doesn't seem like the multinational joint task force has been on the scene of these events. Where do we go from here?
I was in the African Union when the idea was conceptualized, and we looked at the concept of the rule of engagements, for all the countries, Chad, Nigeria, Cameroon, and all that. And after a while, it became very obvious that some of those strategies, rule of engagement, needs to be adjusted because where you have a lot of Chadians, and we are neighbors to the Chad, we have Niger, and they have responsibilities for dealing with our own territory. And how do you identify who's a Chadian, who's a, all these were, challenges that came out of the multinational force. But in spite of that, I believe that to a certain extent, they were able to achieve the objective for it was set up. But these challenges have to be looked at because, it's a dynamic system. But I think also when you have Francophone and or national, it's all better than national interest. They all have their interests, but we are the one that knows where the shoe pinches. And our efforts should be more strengthened internally to be able to ward off some of this banditry and people from the north. The multinational force, yes, the AU was involved, many people are involved, but I think we have to take care of the situation in our country.
Ambassador Olusegun Akinsoya, thank you.